board members or 5 board members or more would happen to be in attendance. It's only the committee members that are having discussion and making decisions.
Right. And but could you give me, Bill, thanks. I forget who is the chair of that committee. Are you the chair of that committee?
I am.
Could you just give me a brief synopsis of it was decided what the function of the committee was? Could you just give us a brief what that was designated and what was discussed and identified that you said dates were discussed and also how the committee would operate and what its function would be. Could you just give us a quick overview of what its function is since we weren't able to attend?
Sure. We got together. We discussed, and this was last Thursday, we gathered. It was Mike, Lou, and the committee members that were there.
So Dr. Wayak and Mr. Rond? And
yes.
You? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Yep.
And our board president was there also.
Okay. And board president, yep.
And during the course of that, we just discussed the history of the projects to catch everybody up to date. And then we decided when we would have meetings and what that advertising would look like, and essentially decided the first and third Tuesdays of every month.
Okay, thanks. And will that be on I assume on the board calendar with the other meetings?
It'll be published on the website. It'll be published in the newspaper.
Okay. And I heard you say also make decisions. In the past with subcommittees, we had the committee would decide what recommendation it was going to bring to the board among those presented to it. Will that be the same function of this committee, or will that committee make independent decisions apart from this board? In the past, again, the committees would bring the recommendation to the board and the board would vote on that recommendation. Is this the same structure?
We will follow the guidance that essentially for a subcommittee, there are some decisions that we can make. There are other decisions that have to be full board. Because honestly, as a subcommittee, there are decisions that we can empower the superintendent to make, and will do so. But where the board needs to have a full vote, the board will have the opportunity to hear not just from a contractor or an architect, but you'll hear from the board that has dug in a little bit deeper and what our recommendation would be, and then the board will vote on it or not vote on it.
Okay, and since some decisions will be made independently by the committee in those meetings, I assume then all rules of a quorum would be established and abided by for the committee as well?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I would, just to clarify, there are certain roles and responsibilities that, and decision-making that accrue to administration, that administration is prepared to make, and administration would, at times, look for insight from members on the committee to help inform those decisions, which would not come to the board because they are the purview of administration.
Okay. So you're saying outside those meetings, if there's a need that the administration has need of a decision to be made, that administrative decision could be informed by committee members only, and a decision in that regard, or the empowerment in that regard, could be made outside the context of a public meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification.
Okay.
With that, we're going to move on to the second subject, which is the communicable disease and immunization policy, and Mike will be presented on that.
Yes, thank you. And this policy I'm asking for the board to consider is coming at a time of COVID. This is actually not a COVID-related policy per se, but rather this policy is contained in many school policy manuals and has been in place long before COVID ever hit the scene. Now, I do think that this policy has very specific and useful applications to COVID, but it itself is not a COVID policy. So it's actually broken down into two parts. The first is immunization. And what's sometimes lost is for years and years and years, school districts have been collecting and requiring immunizations. We have immunization records on every student. And the key is that those immunizations are required by the state by law. So for example, mumps, measles, and rubella is something that we have to have from our students unless they apply for a religious exemption. And this policy simply puts to letter the process that we should take when it comes to managing immunizations. right? And essentially that's it. So it says right under guidelines, essentially summing it up, all students shall be immunized against specific diseases in accordance with state law and regulations unless specifically exempt for religious or medical reasons. And that in essence is the immunization aspect of this policy. Now, the second part of the policy involves communicable disease. And on page 2, under that heading, the key here is that the board directs students who have been, and this is the important language, diagnosed by a physician or are suspected to have a disease by the school nurse shall be excluded from school for the period indicated by regulations of the PA Department of Health or Guidance from state or local health officials for specific diseases and infectious conditions, and it's referenced which ones. And so in this instance, we do have the authority to take students who are ill and ask them to be excluded because of the fact that they have a communicable disease. The important distinction to make is that under no circumstances, except that as mandated by the Department of Health, do we exclude students who do not have the disease by virtue of the fact that they were, as lately been discussed, a close contact. Right? Now, there are instances, perhaps with, say, a measles outbreak in some school district where the Department of Health may come in and say, in some rare cases, you may have to quarantine individuals in exceptional circumstances. By and large, we will only be sending students home who have these communicable diseases. And that's a big distinction from where we are now.
So, Mike,
So,
this essentially means that we will not be recommending a quarantine for an exposed individual to COVID-19.
That is true.
Great, thank you.
That is true. Now, that is only true if we look at the health and safety plan and align the health and safety plan with this policy, which is part of the next discussion that I'm hoping that we can have. Okay?
I had a quick question about that section, that first paragraph under communicable diseases. Is there a reason why it mentions guidance from state or local health officials, but it doesn't reference federal or CDC?
If there is a reason, I'm not aware of it because this is standard language that comes from PSBA.
Okay. And would there be any opposition to including that? Because I know sometimes.
I would be opposed because I know in my experience, we always, like, even if there's staph infections or anything that comes along, we always reach out to the Pennsylvania Department of Health.
State and
I have no experience reaching out to the federal. I don't know if there's a mechanism.
That makes sense. You're reaching out to those individuals. You have the ability to directly contact. That makes sense to me. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
So just a question about the close contacts then. So I know we've already discussed it clearly with respect to the asymptomatic low risk close contacts, but are we now no longer going to worry about the asymptomatic risk close contacts that are?
And that actually, under this policy, we would not. And the question is, do we take that step when we next talk about our health and safety plan?
And I kind of related to that, I guess, is my question within this, again, this same paragraph. It says excluded from school for the period indicated by, and then it says regulations, yes, but it also says by guidance from state or local health officials. So in this particular case of COVID, is that part of your explanation about how the interplay between the health and safety plan of the district versus the guidance from state and local officials? Because our health and safety plan, as it stands now, contradicts guidance from state and local. I guess I'm asking, how do we, in the comparison between our school policy here and our health and safety policy,
Well, guidance, I would interpret guidance as something we would consider but not necessarily be mandated to follow.
correct, but
So
yes, but this is saying that the student shall be excluded from school for the period indicated by guidance from state or local health officials. I mean, I'm skipping the prepositional phrase.
Right, and again,
And our
we
current
can get
health
into
and
the
safety
weeds
plan.
on this. We could say, just leave it by regulations and mandates of the Department of Health.
Well, I'm not advocating that at all. I'm just,
But-
I am in,
To avoid the lack of clarity that you're addressing, I would say that could be resolved by saying, get rid of that entirely and just say by regulations and mandates, and then we could avoid the issue of guidance altogether.
but that, yeah, so that would have to be, in order to eliminate the conflict, that would have to be what would happen.
And I would,
And we would no longer be having in there guidance from state or local
yeah,
health
and I
officials.
would say guidance would be just that, by virtue of its guidance. And I say, well, there's a difference with shall and all that, but if it's guidance, we're not mandated to follow it. If it's regulations, we are. If we want to eliminate that confusion, which I don't identify, but
Sure,
which
sure.
it's understandable, we could just get rid of that altogether and say regulations and mandates, and that's it.
And okay, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying now, but then this is in here because this is the recommended wording from PSBA.
Yeah.
So if we eliminated that, which we have the ability to, it would be, but it's not what PSBA recommends including.
And just so it's clear, I would take guidance as using the word guidance
Okay.
and not be mandated to follow it as administration. If it is a mandate or regulation, administration would follow it.
So this could
But
be
ju-
read,
just
and
to
perhaps the solicitor could weigh in on whether or not that, I like that interpretation, Dr. Mann, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that could be a valid interpretation. Guidance is guidance and mandates are mandates.
But I just wanted to be clear, we are actually currently following the CDC guidance with regard, we are actually, Emily, following the CDC guidance with, these are regarding positives. This has nothing to do with quarantining. So we
Well-
are currently following the guidance from CDC, which states 5 days after symptoms, students can come back to school. So
And
we
how are we
following
gonna,
that same guidance,
hold on.
right?
How are we going to, actually, it's not just the 5 days of exclusion, but it's 5 days of masking after the 5 days of exclusion. And in the arena that we now exist, when it comes to masking optional, I do have questions as to how we're going to enforce that.
So it's important to remember, this policy is a longstanding policy. It is not specific, nor is it meant to be specific to COVID. That's a different animal altogether. This is overall regarding anything that could be a potential outbreak.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Dr.
absolutely.
Sreen, you're right. And that's my next point.
Right.
Here, is that for us to follow all the CDC
How are you gonna
guidance
implement
to
it?
the letter is not really practically possible for us. And to say that we're doing it is misleading.
Well, it would be if we were masking.
Well, as of today, we
But-
have,
Agreed.
and in that case, we are
Right.
in a bad spot when it
Yeah.
comes to following it, which is why, and perhaps that's a good segue into the next policy. Yes, Mr. Demme.
But my understanding, maybe I was wrong, is that we have been told that we cannot enforce.
We can't enforce quarantine.
Quarantine.
Why, if we
no.
can't enforce quarantine, why would we be able to enforce masks?
We're not, in other words,
Well, we can't, that's the point. But we're
Well, even
saying
if
that
you
we
could,
are.
I mean, my point is, my understanding was, I mean, if you can't, if you're not allowed to keep kids out of school.
You
right?
are in the case of positive cases.
Yeah,
though, so,
positive,
yeah,
right.
So
yeah.
we're only talking about positive in this case.
Right.
And the issue that we face is that we all agree they should be out for 5 days, and they are at this point, and,
Right.
and that's easily applied under the policy.
Yeah, the CDC says if you
the little
can't mask
add-on.
for the additional 5 days, then they should be out for 10.
The add-on is the mask
Wow.
thing.
So how would we, even under the current, I mean, I'm confused as to why we think teachers, even under the current, on Friday, when we had masks, that we thought teachers were aware of every,
No, everyone
Kids-
was masking, it made it easier.
I'm sorry?
If everyone's wearing a mask, you don't have to worry about who's 5 days out,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right, and so that's the
but you
problem.
would have them want to know who,
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying you can't really enforce
Yeah,
what we're
Dr.
saying we
Sreen is
are.
correct, that from a point of view of managing this, we are
Yeah.
not going to be able to say the 5 days with the
Right.
mask after they come back. And
Right.
So when we go
Well-
to this plan, I'm saying, we just call that what it is.
Oh,
and
yeah,
say
well,
we're not
So,
going to do
so
it.
don't say we're
It's-
following
but
the
it's just a
CDC when we're
recommendation.
not.
I mean, it's
able
a
to.
recommendation though, so.
Right.
I mean,
But you
like
just said we
do
were
in
following the
medicine,
CDC
you give
recommendations.
and you hope that people follow
But
them.
you said we were following the CDC so I just
We-
want to be clear, we won't be able to.
And that-
We will not be able to.
well, that, I don't know, I think there's a distinction without it.
You can't
It-
enforce 5 extra days of masking, Jeff. You're not going to know, like everyone.
Right,
You
but
can't
that doesn't
expect
mean
the
you're not-
teachers to enforce it,
I
right?
understand that. That doesn't mean that you're not enforcing it. You can't enforce it, right? I mean, the point is you don't know. So what's the point? I mean, here's the thing. People need to send their kids back to school
I'm not
and have
saying
them
that
have a
we
mask
shouldn't.
on.
No, I'm just,
right?
Dr. Ware was indicating that we're following the CDC regulations.
Well,
but-
we're certainly not telling people not to
No,
send
no,
their
we're
kids
we're not
without a
saying
mask on.
don't follow
Right.
them,
So it
but we
seems to me
cannot actually state we are
Right.
following them
Well,
if
we're
you can't
following and we're not,
enforce them.
we're unable to enforce it. I think there's a difference.
No. It's
Well, I think
the
you're both
reality.
right.
I'm just talking about what the
You're both
real
right,
case scenario
because
is.
I think what Mr. Demick and Dr. Sreen are saying, exactly the same thing, except Mr. Demick is saying, we're doing it, but not able to enforce it, and Dr. Sreen is saying, but the underlying circumstance is the same. The kids who come back after 5 days, it's very hard to ensure they're wearing masks. Agreed here.
Right, and I just want to be clear that
Agree
we're
on
not
that.
actually able to.
Right, and I am
realistically follow
uncomfortable with both formulations. And so that's why we have the health and safety plan to actually say what we can do given the circumstance. So putting aside whether we should or should not have masks, the fact that we do not have masks has certain implications for how we do this. And so that brings us to the health and safety plan, which is the second document I would ask the board to consider tonight. And if you look at just the first page with writing, it's actually the second page altogether, right? Under the first arrow at the top, health and safety plan will be monitored and updated as required. And then the very last three words, and local conditions, which means that the local board and the local circumstances can be taken into account. And that ultimately the local board has control over what we do here, right? Now, the first part I want to get to before addressing the idea with masks and quarantine and isolation is that of education, right? And under the first, and everything in this plan is predicated and done to try to get people back into school in person and to eliminate, to the extent possible, having students away from school for any reason. And so, under the options that are available, the second arrow in the middle of the page, the following options are available, and here's, I think, important words. Under defined periods of time and need. All right, so obviously we're in person all the time as much as we absolutely possibly can. We have an online option, Spartan Academy, under defined periods of need, a combination of in-person and cyber instruction for students excluded from school under policy 203, which is what we spoke about initially, which is subject to ongoing review, and then homebound instruction for students, which we've had and will continue to have for a long time. Now, it is very clear to me in talking with teachers and observing, right, that when teachers are asked to teach in person and simultaneously teach kids who are home in their class, right, that is a massive imposition and stress that's really driving our teachers to dissatisfaction with their, not dissatisfaction with their work, they support the kids in all ways, but increasing the challenges and demands of their work in ways that I think long-term, as far as the health and welfare of our teachers, is unsustainable. Now, the fact that the time that students are out for a COVID is down to 5 days now. And very often they'll be determined to have it 2 days in and a weekend will come. So 5 days is the most now. I think the board should give very, very serious consideration to moving away from the demands of having teachers teach simultaneous classes. And recognize that that is in a way a loss for someone who would be home because of a communicable disease under policy 203. But it will be a net gain for all students because students who are in person also experience a diminished experience in going on in through an online when their teacher is teaching in two places. And ultimately, we will be sure that through, and we are better able to give homework assignments and engage students at home without that dual teaching than we've ever been before, through Google Classroom, through campus, whatever modality is being used. And so I would like to see, certainly by our next meeting, us transition away from that particular modality of instruction. But before moving in that direction, it would be, I think I really need to hear from the board that they're not in disagreement with that. So I'll pause there.
No, I support that, Dr. Mann, and for the community's sake, the emails that we have received on this issue from our staff, our educators, have been overwhelmingly expressing the same view that you are, Dr. Mann, and I think it makes sense. And the reality is, this would probably happen, hopefully not very often going forward, with learning loss, the amount of time, like you said. I think the issue of confronting the teachers having done this for the period that they have, so I think it's appropriate to begin to let them come back to focus on teaching the kids in front of them, which is what they've been trained to do and understand best how to do.
Yeah, I would echo those same sentiments. I think, I've spoken about this to the board before I became a director. I think hybrid is bad for both teachers and for students. So I completely agree with this. As long as we are getting rid of the quarantine aspect, I think if we are forced to quarantine, which again, I don't think we're heading in that direction. But for students who are sick, just like we did prior to COVID, teachers were not required to teach them, in a hybrid style. So I would support those same sentiments.
So just a couple of concerns. I mean, I agree. I think it's good to get away from it for the reasons that have been stated already. I guess my concerns are still going to be for those kids that are unlucky enough to fall between a Monday and a Friday and miss a full week of instruction. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on numbers wise. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen that often, hopefully, because I think most of them, it seems, I know in the past anyway, we used to be finding out they were positive over weekends or pretty close to a weekend. The only thing I would ask is that we have a really good mechanism or protocol in place for identifying pretty quickly between the nurse and the students' teachers team that they're going to be out, so that they get that information pretty quickly with respect to materials that they need to do. I mean, I think they all know at this point, especially the secondary, to check Google Classroom, but any supports they might need, if they could just be pretty robust
Every day
about
is
it.
important. Every day is important. If the student is not sick home, they should be home working. And I could not agree more. Maybe Dr. Trinkle, you can make a note of that, and that will be part of our administration. That's a very important point. Could not agree more.
And I don't want to assume this, but I'm verifying that in the past, when we had a short-term illness and students were provided with what was being worked on in the class, that they would be afforded that same opportunity. While they're not dialing in and viewing the class, they do know and they can work on what's taking place, and we'll have assignments and things like that they can kind of keep pace and keep up with the workload and the instruction. But then once they get back in,
Give a little time to
that
get back
historically
and-
would have
yeah.
taken place with the teacher and the parents
100%.
and the student would still be taking place. And honestly, they would resume to more of what that was, as opposed to the disconnected learning that we may have had.
And my guess, Mr. Lissette, is that we are 1,000 times better at doing that now than we were in February 2019.
Agreed.
So we've made strides, and we will bring good things out of this. We will not let kids languish at home. And obviously, if they're homesick, we're not going to ask them to be working. But if they're home because they're home, we will do everything we can to reach out and do something. And our teachers actually be freer to do that kind of work when they're not, trying to do stuff that they've done so well, and then we've asked them to respond in ways that are inspirational, but it's just not a long-term solution anymore as we look to a communicable disease rather than a pandemic. Okay?
In addition to that, yes, I would agree that trying to teach simultaneously on a screen and to students live in a classroom is exhausting, and our teachers have done an admirable job, but that shouldn't be something that is continually asked of them, because it is draining and exhausting for them. However, my only concern then is both from the management on the teacher side of makeup work and on the student side, the stress of the student and the parent who's at home. Some of our current, perhaps, policies or handbook makeup parameters that say, this work will be completed within so many days of a return to school. I would ask that, the administration perhaps looks at empowering the teacher with coming up with a plan for each student that might have to,
Yep.
since this is an extraordinary time, that might have to fall outside, and some forgiveness and some flexibility
Absolutely.
on a case-by-case basis be given.
Right, and we have to be as flexible as we possibly can, with just a small caveat, we want to enable kids not to get their work done,
Correct,
all right? So
correct.
that's the balance, and we will err on the side of making sure the kid gets it, but at some point, hey, get
Oh,
ready,
yeah.
let's go.
Oh, yeah, and I
That's,
think the trust goes both ways
Yep,
there, and trust is something
exactly.
we could all use a little more of, especially these kids and these teachers. So I think if we trust in them, we'll all be better off.
So that said, I want to get Mr. Pepe on because he has some budget stuff, but I'd like to go to the second part of this policy, which is the grids. Now, I think we get through this pretty quickly, but here, as far as a lot of this is the same, but some of it is very real and substantially different. Under the second block down, facilities, modifying facilities, we have classrooms and other instructional spaces will be configured to promote learning. Physical distancing will be maximized as feasible. And so our focus again is on learning, and we understand that we have to do as much as we can to mitigate, but when it comes to, say, guided reading, we'll have our kids at tables because that's where they work best to learn to read, while still trying to maintain the facility, but that's the primary thing, right? The rest, no change. Let's look at the next big one is contact tracing. And under contact tracing, it's the second block on the second page. Southern Lehigh District will utilize its immunization and communicable disease policy for infectious disease strategies. And that's the one we just looked at. The district will not perform contact tracing or quarantine students who are not do so by governing authorities. And there, Mrs. Geeman, they see the mandated, which might be helpful as we look at this. And so this is the reality. Even if the board were to say, don't do this tonight, we're not approving it, the reality is that this is what we're doing now. That this is a reflection of how we manage COVID in the environment that is a maskless environment. And then the Southern Lehigh, the middle thing, okay, obviously report positive illnesses. There's no concern about that. Then the last one, Southern Lehigh School District will continue to update the digital record that will denote positive cases on the SLSD COVID resource website. My thought is we move to report positive cases because in the communicable disease policy, positive cases is the concern. And the idea, like the 14-day running average, right? I will tell you that I have completely lost faith in that metric because, for one, the CDC recommendation now has kids back after 5 days. And so we have people who are back in school counting against an average that determines whether we should not be in school. And so my thought is that as we move to adjust to infectious disease and communicable disease, we adjust our reporting to be consistent with that and saying we have so many cases of COVID or so many cases of RSV or whatever, particular communicable disease we are tracking. And that's a big change, but it's, I think, consistent with the practical implications of how we're managing this right now.
Dr. Mann, I just have a quick question. I would agree with what you're saying with the practical applications, how we're managing it. My question is the 14-day metric still required to be reported to the PA Department of Health once it hits a certain number? I thought the reason we started tracking that and the pandemic coordinator would report and we had that as a metric was, I thought when this first came out, the Department of Health mandated that, not saying they would shut us down or anything,
Right.
but mandated that they would want to know what the 14-day count was when it reached number X. My question is, and you might not have the answer, I appreciate, but I just want to raise the question of, is that still a requirement of Pennsylvania Department of Health?
Yeah, we have a mandated report every Friday that we turn into them. And so whatever it is they're asking for, we're giving them. And maybe they're asking for 14-day numbers, I don't even know. But in my view, I don't know what value that is. And so
I understand with the absolute, like, what's happening on the ground in our classroom, I understand what you're saying. My only question is it a data point that we're going to have to be tracking anyway?
we'll give them whatever they want, and then it'll change in a week because that has been the reality of it. And so I can't imagine, even if they're asking for 14 days now, it won't be long that they're going to realize that that's not a meaningful thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
They won't ask for it anymore. So maybe they'll ask for the 5-day rolling count. Which,
Your connection between the 14-day count and what's happening in our buildings right now and the disconnect there, 100%.
Yeah.
Because everything we're now doing in our classrooms negates the value of that data point.
Yeah. And then just to conclude, because we have to get Mr. Pepe out here, but the diagnostic screening and testing, We're simply saying, don't come to school if you're an employee, if you're sick. Don't send your children to school if they're sick. And let us know if kids are sick, because under the communicable disease policy, we have to know. And that we are prepared to mandate that people stay home when we believe that they are sick. Then under vaccinations, I do want to take the occasion to thank Mrs. Bachman to say that on January 28th, we have a vaccination clinic here at the high school, January 28th, 4:30 to 6:30, open to the public. So we're going to continue with that. And the rest of the language is unchanged. And so if these two policies, go ahead, Dr. Ware.
There's just one addition that I would like to consider, and while we're discussing this policy,
Right.
it was regarding the first column with regard to masks. We received the timely correspondence from a concerned parent about potentially some intimidation that may be occurring, and received some correspondence today about some intimidation. He called for some clear and direct communication from the district, so I'd like to just consider the addition under our mask paragraph there. So I'd like to consider something that states, face masks may be worn by individual choice only by anyone on the grounds or within the authority of the Southern Lehigh School District. No personnel or representative of the Southern Lehigh School District may, at any time, for any reason, force, coerce, request, or encourage anyone to wear a face mask against that person's expressed or implied will, nor may any personnel or representative of Southern Lehigh School District impose any extra requirement or disallow anyone from participation in any district-related activity for choosing to not wear a face mask. I'd like there to be some type,
I
something
think
to
that's,
that effect.
I mean, I do hope that that's how it's approached, and that has been our discussions among our administrators, that it truly is mask optional. We're not recommending one way or the other. You just do what you decide.
I just
Won't
want to make sure
that
that there's some
contradict
clear-
what
some
we've,
clear
I
communication.
know back earlier in the, your health and safety plan, it does say that we will follow mandates. So if it's mandated that we're masked, isn't it contradictive to then have later in the same policy say that we won't ever ask anybody to
Well,
wear a
except for
mask?
like on buses, we still are wearing masks on buses, and we will. And regardless if Dr. Wayach's language goes in there, we'll still wear them on buses until we're told we're not supposed to, or we don't have to. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, I don't have it in front of me, and just hearing what you said, I think that is what we've been telling everybody.
Good, great. I think I would just like to see us consider some language in here so it's very clear.
Yeah, I think for pretty obvious reasons, and something that we witnessed tonight, that we need to have a very clear statement that it's not going to be acceptable either way to, if somebody's choosing to wear a mask, that's not okay to bully them.
Right.
And if somebody's choosing not to, that's not okay to bully
No,
them.
we agree with that.
Okay,
We agree.
but I think we need to state that very clearly, because it's something that's, I'm a bit uncomfortable not having a statement, because it's an issue that can and will happen. While today was okay, things may play out in the coming weeks
Sure.
that it's just not fair
Well,
to an individual.
Let me ask this. I don't know if anyone has a different view, but from what I heard you say, I think that's what we're doing, and that certainly is what I want us to be doing. Just as a practical matter, if we're going to approve this tonight, like, there's a lot of words there, right? And so, we could go with the understanding that that's what it is and put those words in for next meeting, or somehow get those words into this so everyone could have it and approve it.
I can email them right now to the board. So I would like to see that considered tonight for a vote.
And that's, again, whatever the board wants to do with that, that's up to the board.
I would suggest that you modify it to say when you are functioning in a mask optional arrangement, that statement is applicable.
Okay.
All right, let's move on.
Okay?
Chris,
So-
are you emailing that to the board?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that being said, I would, if the board thinks it's a reasonable idea, we'd like to move the 203, because in the regular board meeting agenda, we're in the work session now, move the agenda, I have a space there that says policy 203, If people are okay with it, we can move then 203 to that space. And then I have an update to the health and safety plan. We can move the health and safety plan up to that space with Dr. Wayok's added language.
There's just one other small language change I'd like
Okay.
to see in 203.
Okay?
Just so I'm
just gonna
clear with 203 while you're getting your notes there. For 203, any kind of board policy, we have to have a first reading, second reading. Oh, okay, right.
So this would.
If
this would
there's
be
a
the first
significant
reading.
change, correct.
First reading of it. And a lot of this, Dr. Stream, is just happening, like the immunization and all this stuff is going on. So this is a good policy that we should have that actually
Agreed.
tells what we should be doing, what we're already doing.
So then how can we really approve the health and safety plan with 203 in it if
Well-
we haven't really, I mean, unless we're approving it as is, but it sounds like we're not potentially going to do that in the near future.
Right.
I'm just throwing
Yeah,
it out
and I
there.
would say, by virtue of the fact we refer to 203 in the health and safety plan, health and safety plan will use that language, even if it's not an official board policy, by virtue of that it's in this
Okay.
referencing, it's like an attached document to the plan.
So it could be included in 203, could be included in the health and safety plan as a reference, even though it's not read into policy. That's what it would be used as a reference to say but the policy, if it passes, is enacted, and therefore, whatever the attached document would also be, before it becomes school policy, it would
Whether
just
you
be a
call it
guide.
guidance for administration.
Right.
Attachment to the policy,
Perfect.
or just referring to attachment A, if you want to
Right,
call it.
exactly. Okay, that makes sense to me. I did have a question about, if we're still talking about 203, we can have this discussion. I know you want to get to other things in workshop. I too have other questions and wording about 203, but I don't want to take up workshop. So we could discuss all this when we're discussing the policy in the general meeting, right? Would that be,
We could do that, yes.
can we do that so we can
I
just
think that's
move
probably
on?
a good idea.
Can we just
because-
discuss all of this because they're on the agenda when we have a motion, a second, and discussion and?
Yeah, you can make revisions during the regular.
Right, we
voting
can,
meeting.
because it's already on there, right?
Right, because it's already been listed on the agenda.
Right. So I'd suggest that we just make any other additional word tweaks. Dr. Wayek, I know you and I
That's a
both.
good idea. Is that
Is
all
that
right?
good? Okay, let's do that during the general meeting so we can get this done.
And just to clarify, policy 203, I believe, is an existing policy.
Yes.
We're just making a
No,
revision to
for
that.
some reason, we don't have it.
Well, it's referenced in existing policy documents that we do have up online.
But I
It
don't think
says it replaces. I have the other policy. It says this, like 214, it says this 214 replaces former policies 617 and 203.
So there's no existing.
There is no existing.
There really is not.
at all.
We have 214, and it says on 214, this is the old format, and so it says what policy it references and replaces in this boxed format. This is the old one, but it says 214 replaces 617 and 203.
So this is I think this is good to stand alone.
Yeah, we don't have a 203.
We're okay with that, I think. So that said, first, we do have a guest with us tonight. Mr. Ken Moore is here with us. He is Southern Lehigh's representative from Luzerne Cardinal Community College. And Mr. Pepe their budget is on our agenda tonight. And he is here if there are any questions, but Mr. Pepe is going to present. But I do want to welcome you, sir. And thank you for joining us tonight. And I know that if there are questions from the board, you're more than willing to take them. And we'll have Mr. Pepe do his presentation, and then we could have any discussion afterward. So, Mr. Pepe, I did say I will leave you 20 minutes, and 14 is close to 20.
Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to
You gotta turn on your mic.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay, so I said thank you for giving me an opportunity to present, first look at some of the impacts on the budget. This presentation, should be able to go along here. So I wanted to start with just a short recap, and this was very helpful to me, because I'm on like day 15. So a quick recap of the budget was looking at the options that every district has to stay within the Act 1 index as 3.4, or if they choose not to do that, then they need to seek authorization to exceed that. That decision was already made back at the board meeting in November 8th. And as a result, that is already set into motion a couple of times. The Board of Directors has already agreed that they are not going to increase the tax rate that would exceed the index of 3.4%. In doing so, they agreed that they're going to comply with section 687 of the adoption for the budget moving forward this fiscal year. And also that they will certify that increasing any tax rate less than or equal to the amount will be sufficient for the budgetary needs for the budget year of 2023. So moving forward, the first thing that I wanted to do is look at what are some of the key drivers for this year's budget. And in particular, salaries make up most of everybody's operating budget. We're looking at a potential load of an additional $850,000 of salaries. That's pretty much predicated on collective bargaining agreements already in place. However, we still, as we're working through a draft budget, we're always looking for efficiencies, we're always looking for areas where we could potentially come up with savings, and I know the superintendent has been looking at that already. So all of these numbers are subject to change. The next area of bigger impact is healthcare. And currently, based on what the broker was talking about, a 12% increase with the high market account, that could be a potential increase of $557,000 on the budget. And again, as brokers move closer to the actual striking of the budget, hopefully they're trying to get better rates for a final budget. But these numbers seem to be in line with what we're going to see in the budget presentations that we'll talk about tonight. Another major area that's going to continue to impact our district as well as many districts throughout the United States is transportation. And with the shortage of drivers, that's one of the things that's really pressing. We're currently in a position where we need to look at getting either a one-year renewal on our existing account and or going out to bid. So that's another major area where we continue to manage and seek savings. So then I looked at three other big players in our budget, and they happen to be partnerships with the Lehigh Department of Community College, the Technical Institute, and the Independent Unit 21. So in the LCCC or LCCC category, we're looking at a total impact on the budget of $286,000. What I found very interesting is the combined school district sponsorship for operations and capital is going to remain flat at about $6.1 million. However, that doesn't mean that every district's rate stays flat because there's an adjustment based on the calculations that go into that. LCTI, that's a pretty significant part of the budget as far as our overall partnership, because that represents about $1.3 million of our budget. And total member district share with debt service is looking at an increase of 3.5% or $22,000. The other budget that we're going to look at approving tonight is the Iu21 budget. That increase or that total on us is $71,000. However, the general operating budget for that group is $3.3 million, and the combined district contribution of all the districts that belong to the IU is $819,000, and that's not going to change. So these three, the two we're really focusing on tonight is the Lehigh Department of Community College and the Iu21 budget. So let's start with the first one. When you look up here, that'll be a little bit easier today. Okay. So when you look up here, I started with a quick analysis, and what I was looking at is the sponsor appropriation. So for the community college, current budget is $4.6 million, represents about 10.8% of their overall budget. If you look at the 22-23 year, it's 4.6, no change. However, it's slightly less, 10.4%. So really, it still represents 10% of their overall budget. No big change there. So then here, when I look at the total of all the sponsorships, and you see everybody from Allentown all the way down here to Whitehall, what does it mean to Southern Lehigh? So if you look at the area of Southern Lehigh, in accordance with the operating agreement distribution and cost model I was talking about, there's really three things happening. The first is this area here, where they're looking at the operating budget change from 21-22 to 22-23. That change is $1,000. It's $1,035, and the percentage is 0.7%. So it's not really a big mover. If you look at the next category, and that's debt service, it actually is going down slightly, or $405, negative 0.3%. So in total, the aggregate is going up on us $630. That's the impact of their budget increase this year, or 0.2%. So again, it's not really detrimental or moving the needle in the whole scheme of things. I'm glad you were here tonight in case you had any, you can answer all the questions, I won't have to. But I did look a little deeper, and I looked at total increase in expenditures is up 1.7 million. And what's really driving that is, again, back to how I opened, salary and benefits. That accounts for 73.1% of their budget. That's on par with what I've analyzed with most budgets. The expenditures represent 1.4 million of the total, or 82% of the increase. So that's where the bulk of it's coming from. They include 2.4% increase for administrative staff, 2.3% for classified staff, and 2.5% for faculty. Fringe benefits is the other player here, and they're looking at budgeting 14% increase. And before I told you we were looking at 12%, and their budget for this area is 14%. I also found it interesting they're utilizing $200,000 of benefit reserves and $245,000 of enrollment stabilization. So that's how they're balancing that budget and keeping the cost impact flat or close to for most of the groups. So now I'm going to switch over to the Iu21 budget. It's a lot less to look at. Basically, you're looking at revenues of 3.2 million, equaling their expenditures of 3.2 million for the current year, and for the proposed budget, 3.3. So where's the real story? And the real story for them has to do with the state share of Social Security and PSERS. And if you look at the increase of 16% based on the increase to the PSERS rate, that's pretty impactful to this group. And that's an increase of $39,000. And then the rest is general fund, interfund transfer for administrative fees, also up 6%, but the impact's $88,000. So that's really what the two main drivers are for this group. So the $99,000 increase, the district contribution, remember I said it was going to remain flat, but that doesn't mean there's no increase or decrease. So based on the changes in here, it looks like the estimated contribution for Southern Lehigh is up $1,376 or 1.9%. Fringe benefits and medical RX premiums are budgeted in at 12%, which is consistent with what we're currently looking at. And salaries are up 3% on teachers, 3.4% on Act 93 administrators. And again, PSERS rate of 35.7%. I think current year it's around 34 point change. So it's still pretty impactful. And that's one of the hurdles that we're going to have in our own budget. And that's really all I have for the overview on those budgets that are going to be voted on tonight. Are there any questions from the board?
I do want to just add that we spoke about partnerships, and while I don't want to get too far ahead, because until we have agreements, we don't, but the L-Tri-C has been a key player in working with us to try to develop some great opportunities that we hope we'll be able to talk about before too very long. Okay. Mr. Moore, do you?
Would you like to share any thoughts?
Thank you very much. I won't say too much because you're on a tight schedule. As Luke pointed out, your increase this year is $630. Overall, the increase for sponsoring our 13 sponsoring school districts is 0. This will be the 9th year in a row that we've been able one of the things, to give you a little background, is in accordance with the original charter that sets up between the state, sponsoring school districts, and the students, is that all are supposed to contribute 33%. And as Lou pointed out, this coming year will be at around 10.4%. When I first became your representative, it was 20%. We worked really hard to find alternative ways of coming up with revenue and a variety of other things, realizing that the sponsoring school districts have been pinched to the point where we've been able to not put the pinch on you as well and be able to maintain that for 9 years now. So we're very proud of that, and we'll continue working on that. Number two, for those of you who are new trustees, are new members of the school board, I'd like to invite you, and we're working already with Dr. Brown, to set up a meeting with you to try and spend a little time bringing you up to speed on community college and the sponsored school districts, and look forward to that in the next few months. And number three, I want to point out, as I do every year, which is, this is one of the very few things that can provide your citizens just for K-12, but anyone, including old people like me, can go to L-Tri-C and take the benefit of the amount of money that you put in as a sponsor of the community college. And an awful lot of our services that we provide are for workforce development and redevelopment for those of us who might be going for our 5th or 6th or 7th careers. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll look forward to interacting with you in the near future.
We'll be talking a lot more in our future conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Okay. So we're going to take a 2-minute break just so we can stretch up here, and we'll start in 2 minutes.